welcome.
Thank you.
So glad that you're here. Kenny Davis, shout out to you. Before we get started, just please introduce yourself in terms of your day-to-day role at Arch Academy.
Absolutely. So my name is Kenny Davis. I'm a primary counselor at Arch Academy. I'm also the adventure program coordinator. So day-to-day, I do carry a caseload, usually 2 to 3, sometimes 1, just depending on our census. So I'm doing a lot of, traditional, individual therapy, working with family, check-in calls, all treatment planning, all those kinds of things, on top of coordinating the adventure component of Arch Academy.
Which is pretty cool, which you've had a big hand in growing, which we'll get into. But I want to circle back on something that we started in here before we started recording, because I think it's just super interesting, and I kind of just want to dive into it.
Sure.
I got to say, I'm like a little afraid to bring it up.
Are you?
I have some like fear because maybe it's not controversial, but it's a big topic.
Yeah.
It's an important topic. And that is the adolescents, the kids that come to our programs are good kids, and like we were talking about before, these are 14 to 17-year-old boys right now, although we're starting a girls program by the end of this year.
Exciting.
Which we're very excited about. For those, the history of Cumberland Heights, we actually started treating boys and girls adolescents in 85, and about maybe 15 years ago, we closed our girls program because we couldn't keep it solvent. We couldn't keep it open. We couldn't find patients or residents at the time. So one of the things I've always found when I think about you and I think about your job, because you used to work here and now you work at Arch. You used to work in our adult population, now you work at Arch.
Correct.
One of the things as a clinician that's always scared me a little bit is, especially in the recovery field, if you will, or the addiction treatment field, how do you balance that dichotomy with a kid between an abstinence-based lifestyle and maybe the need for some, what we might call like good orderly direction, and that they might just need to grow up a little bit or die.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in our literature.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like we discussed earlier, that was one of the things that was, I guess, fascinating, yet, a little scary too, is, what does this look like? Because
are you in recovery?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Yeah.
What does this look like for somebody that maybe doesn't want, to be here? A lot of the kids that come in, they're doing it because their parents want them to be there. And I guess some of the adult men and women, same situation, but
no doubt.
How do I quickly build that rapport with that particular resident, which I think is huge. And I think it's interesting. I was actually listening to a different podcast, not yours, but I was listening to a different podcast, and they were talking about this idea in psychology, and the podcast was actually talking about search and rescue work, but they talked about this idea of edge work. And the more I thought about that, I know Cumberland Heights has a great tradition in meeting patients where they're at. So I already had that in my back pocket, and I knew how to do that well. But for these kids to really go all the way and say, hey, I know you don't want to be here, and I'm sorry that you are, and what can we work on? And if it's not abstinence-based currently, if it's more my anxiety or my mental health or, PTSD or whatever, well, or just a connection, let's work on that first. Let's sit down. Let's work together on this treatment plan, and let's put in here what you want to work on. And I think that giving them that agency really is kind of a jarring experience. Like, oh, okay, this is not what I expected. This is not somebody just telling me what to do. This is somebody asking me, what do I want to work on? And if it's not, staying clean right now, that's okay too. I'll put that in the parking lot. It's still on the treatment plan, but I'll defer that out until we kind of get to that.
Yeah, and maybe that's not really our job to figure out for them.
Sure.
Which kind of maybe leads into, the type of kid that comes to Arch, and why did they come to Arch?
Yeah.
How would you answer that? What do you think?
Oh, that's a good question, and there's a lot of answers to that question, because everyone's going to be an individual, and while we all share, people in recovery all sort of share similar parts of stories and how we feel and all those, lack of connection and all the things that we go through, I think each kid's story is obviously going to be a little bit different. So kind of a hard one to answer. We do see higher incidences of, kids that are using harder drugs, kids that are using things that are laced, and maybe they didn't know, and maybe they liked the way it felt, find out that it was laced, and then chase that rabbit down the rabbit hole. So kind of a hard question to answer on the spot like that.
But most kids are experiencing some flavor or some, I'll just call it a manifestation on a continuum of addiction.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of receiving a primary diagnosis of addiction, and the behaviors that support addiction.
Correct.
Is kind of the kid that comes to Arch Academy. What else? I mean, what kind of behavior problems are we generally seeing? Is it all different? Do they come in with a myriad of co-occurring disorders, trauma? How have you seen that change?
Yeah.
Stay the same?
Yeah. So, we do treat that as well. Absolutely. Common mental health diagnosis, anxiety, depression, PTSD, those kinds of things. And I think as, you remove that substance, and you'll relate to this, I know, but as you remove that substance, those behaviors tend to show themselves a little bit more, because that substance was helping to, in an unhealthy way, helping to cope with those behaviors and those
pain,
feelings and
sure.
all that kind of stuff.
Shame.
And then tack on, I don't even want to be here.
Yeah.
And the behavior, and they're adolescent boys. I mean,
I was just about to say development.
Yeah. We can't, I don't want to expect too much. I want to expect them to act like adolescent boys at times too, but I don't want them to be in pain either. I want to teach new skills, new ways to cope, new ways to communicate, new ways to express how they're feeling. Because I think until you name your dragon, you'll never really slay it. So I'm feeling, sad or being very specific about that emotion that I'm feeling. Okay, so you're feeling disrespected, or you're feeling unheard. That's something we can actually unpack versus I'm just angry. Right? Yeah.
Frustrated,
Right.
And I might have, thrown a basketball or had a tantrum or, I just think that's super challenging. I mean, I am a trained therapist, but it doesn't mean I'm an expert in anybody's experience but my own. And I think that, being an adolescent is a tricky time, 14 to 17. What were you doing?
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden being thrown into, a program like Arch. And I guess you got to have respect for those kids that are doing the hard work to sit in front of you and wrestle with, Kenny's telling me that I'm actually, getting to the core of, what, actually I am disappointed.
Right.
Or yeah, Kenny, I am really hurt that this happened in my family group, or somebody talked to me a certain way. I mean, that's all new stuff for them.
Right.
Brand new.
Right.
Right.
And it's really in making that transfer from working with adults to adolescents.
Is it the same?
I was concerned. I was like, I don't think that there's the insight's not going to be there, and it's not. But it's almost the same.
Interesting.
It's like once you feel it and you learn how to really unpack something and say, okay, I'm angry. What's behind that? Is it fear? Okay, what does fear mean? And actually working that through.
Yeah.
Is a process that once you do it, it almost becomes intuitive.
Right. Well, and it just reminds me, shout out Kitty Harris, Dr. Harris from Texas Tech University. In another life of mine, they developed developmental models of addiction to understand kind of the root of addiction, and it's not just her, but many others. This idea that once you start down a using process. It doesn't have to be about drugs, but with behavior, the behaviors that support addiction, that your growth developmentally is stunted. So it kind of makes sense from that prism to understand that a lot of adults, we all start using. as quiet as it's kept pretty early on.
Correct.
Not all. I mean, some people don't,
Sure.
but there might be those drivers, those original pain sources that are rooted in childhood, sometimes adolescence, emerging adulthood. And so that's ironic, or maybe just the way it's supposed to be, that you would discover that it's actually pretty similar.
Yeah. It was, I was like, wow, this is pretty much the same thing. And we're just hopefully addressing it earlier on, you know?
So I'm curious, how do you present to a resident the first day that they're there? Or, you know, think about it from like a parent's perspective, because there might be some parents listening, and I want to make sure that, you know, I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent, and, you know, a mutual friend of ours has done this in the past year who we care about deeply. And what might that be like?
For the parent?
Trying to make a decision and put your child in an addiction treatment facility and hoping for the best. I mean, whew, that's got to be difficult. So how do you present to a resident on day one?
So that's an interesting question.
Does it depend?
It does depend. So if someone, let's say they show up on my caseload, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look through the chart a little bit, get a little bit of backstory, what's going on. Maybe put myself in the cabin to kind of see how this person's acclimating.
Like physically?
Physically, yeah. What's going on, you know, how they're feeling, because they don't know me from anyone just yet. I don't want to just run in, I'm your counselor, you know, and get a feel for the vibe. If working with adolescents has taught me anything, it's how to stay current. But I can pretty well tell, okay, this person probably listens to maybe this style of music. Maybe. So going back to the office, finding that and just having something that's a little more comforting, and they come into the office, I don't have the fluorescent lights on or anything like that, but, you know, some just kind of chill down, some music, you know, and let's just have a conversation and tell me what's going on, and loosely going through that kind of that BPS just to confirm that we have the correct information and all that kind of stuff, but doing it in a very comfortable, loose, conversational kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine that there are kids that are, 'cause here you are at a campus, 70 acres, you're assigned to a cabin, which are very nice, right?
Yeah.
But now you got a bunkmate, and, you know, and their off period time, you know, are you gelling or are you isolating?
Yeah.
You know, are you cutting up? You know, are you loud? So it's interesting that you're kind of, instead of jumping in, you're just going to observe and watch and see how they're presenting. And then you might get, I mean, kids might be presenting to you with a lot of ego or really sad and very emotional, I would imagine. How do parents present?
Parents present as, just like you kind of said, you know, what a decision to have to make to put your child, you know, as a father, imagining putting my child in the care of someone else, because, you know, we don't know what to do anymore.
And if you didn't work in this field and weren't in recovery, I mean, think about that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's a whole other...
Yeah, that's a whole other animal there. But usually in that first phone call, you know, I've waited to make that phone call after I've had that conversation with the patient, so I have the information, you know, because that's the question: how are they doing? You know, what's he saying? What's going on? And being able to be more informed about that before having that conversation. But as far as the parents' presentation, you know, concerned, loving, you know, grateful, scared. You know, what does family therapy look like? What if he doesn't want to do that? And that's another thing that's really interesting about Arch when I came over is on main campus, there's a family program that handles most of the family therapy. But on Arch, the primaries handle it. And I was a little bit like, what is that going to be about? But, man, to be able to have that whole picture all the time is just, it's incredible.
Why? Why is that helpful?
Because you, I mean, and the family program did a great job, obviously, of communicating it. You know, treatment team meets, and we all talk about what's going on. But
and also, there's a different census out here, so it's no shade to the family program.
Absolutely.
I mean, they have done incredible work with the family education groups and the individual sessions, but there's 110 people here on any given day, versus 25 at Arch.
Right.
So sorry, I just
No.
I hear you. Why is it helpful?
Why is it helpful?
Because when you said that, your face lit up. Like, man, I can't imagine not having those tools.
Wow.
And I'm following you.
Yeah.
Because I have some similar experience, but I want to hear what you have to say about it.
I can't think of the exact word, but it puts us all on the same kind of platform. Obviously, I'm not a member of the family, right? That's obvious. But we all kind of know what it is we're talking about. And while I might not say everything that, me and the resident are talking about in individual therapy, I feel like we're more on the same page with what's going on. And they're always like, during a check-in call, they get like a 10 or 15-minute check-in call once a week through Zoom. And while we listen, it'd be like from me to Ryan when the kid's on the laptop. So I'm listening to make sure that it doesn't go sideways. And at the same time, I'm hearing, well, why don't you talk to Kenny about that? It's just a little bit more of they know.
Because they know you.
They know me, yeah.
I would also imagine, too, part of the reason why I got into this work was actually going to a family program in treatment and experiencing the multifamily group experience, which is powerful.
Absolutely.
Here you are. So for a family, what that really means is when you participate in a family program is usually you get invited for a couple days and you're going to do a series of group work activity, but there are other families and their loved one is also present. And so it's something to experience where you're there and the focus is on you and your system while all the other families are watching, But what's interesting is I learned a lot by watching the other families go through.
Right.
So, but being an MFT myself, one thing about families that's so impactful in terms of, it's just more information.
Yeah.
It's easy as an individual to come into therapy and not intentionally, but hide.
Yeah.
So when you have the mom or when you have the dad or the stepdad or the uncle or the grandma also present and bought in, it's just more data.
Yeah.
And you probably learn something too,
like
you're like, oh, that's interesting. And that's kind of outside of my scope in terms of my work with this kid. But, I can see some connections here with maybe parentification of a child, which is where a child is brought into the adult subsystem, the adult conversations. They probably don't need to be. That might be unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can start to observe that a little bit. And, that stuff is probably helpful for you to help join with that kid and chart a path forward.
Yeah. I think we have a parent support group that meets too weekly. And I have a lot of parents that do that. And what's really cool about that is that even after the kid has graduated our program, they can still participate in that. And you have, just like you said, just a wealth of experience and knowledge and wisdom of, maybe we've had a kid that's been here before and has to come back, and that family can share with another family kind of with that, what to expect when the kid comes home, and the reentry contract and continuing care plan and all of those things. So
what's a reentry contract?
A reentry contract. You don't know what a reentry contract is?
Well, I just want you to say.
Okay.
But and does every resident that come through Arch get a reentry contract?
Yes. Well, yes and no. Let me say that. Reentry contract is a guideline of boundaries that the family has for the patient, and even I like to use it too as the patient has the boundaries for the parents and the expectations.
Right.
Because I think that is a little bit more agency too. Like, what is it that you expect from your parents? So it goes through different things. What is, meeting attendance going to look like? Therapeutic support services, cell phone usage, that's a tough one. Nicotine compliance, another tough one. Time with friends, work, school, all the things that you would anticipate as you have someone transfer from, residential treatment, maybe back to an IOP and home. Now, they might not get one if they're transferring to another level of care.
Right.
Another, maybe a behavioral health or an alpha or something like that. They wouldn't need that reentry contract, but we would give them one that counselor would handle that when they do transfer back home.
So this is actually a form, like a sheet paper.
Correct.
Right? That's interesting. We might link that in the episode.
Okay.
Just, why not? But when do you start on the reentry contract? And do you start on it just with the resident or with the parents, or do you guys present it to the parents? I got lots of questions.
I'm glad you asked me that question. I think every counselor would be different in this situation, but what I can do is speak to what I found to be helpful. I will start that. So our average length of stay right now, I think, is 103 days. So between 3 and maybe it's longer, we're progress based. 7 different stages, and we can talk about that later. But I want to start that maybe at the halfway point when you start to, when you could see somebody buying in and considering what's it going to look like when I go home, and maybe they do want to stay clean and they don't know how to do that. So we're going to do a kind of a rough draft, a mock. Let's just see what this looks like. What does it look like to go home and for you to remain clean if that's what you want to do. And then I'll also, once we get towards actual discharge or transfer or whatever, I'll take 2 weeks to do it. I think some counselors take 1. It's a beefy document. There's a lot of tension in the room, and I don't want to put that pressure on, especially at the very end. So I might wait till we have one more family session at the very, very end, but then we'll do the 2 weeks before that. We'll space that out and get that hashed out. So we have
with
time
the parents.
With the parents, yes.
I see.
Yeah. So I'll give them.
What does it literally look like though? Do you email it to them?
Yeah.
And so they can marinate and ingest it.
Yes. So I'll email that to them. There'll be a blank one, and then there'll be an example, which I think is helpful too. Just
cool.
kind of get an idea what that looks like. And then I'll do the same thing with the kid. I'll give the kid the example and the blank. Maybe 10 days before the family session where we start to do it.
Right.
And they'll fill it out, and then parents will do the same thing. We'll come together, and I'll put it together.
Oh, so the kid does one and the parent does one, and they at the same time kind of show and tell. That's really interesting.
What they're thinking.
Because there's probably some times that they're on the same page.
Yeah.
And there's probably some other times where they're not.
More often than not, I think they are actually closer to the same page. I mean, maybe the curfew and all those kinds of things are a little bit different, but I think that a lot of the things they're on the same page, and surprised to find that they were on the same page. But I'll also have the email, so I'll be able to see that, and I'll have the kids too, so I'll be able to see, in the background, okay, these are pretty in line. I'm going to ask the kid what he thought about this one, just to show that he is considering this thing. He is, buying into this thing. He is considering being clean.
Reentry contract sounds good for anybody in treatment,
and
no
that's
matter how old or young you are.
It's not all that much different than maybe what a wife would expect from a husband, or a mom would expect from a YMP patient. It's really not that much different. So I make sure that the kids know that too, that this is not about you being 14, 15, 16, 17. Right. This is about what this next phase looks like, because it is super critical.
So take us through, for those that might not know, you mentioned kind of the structure or the growth trajectory of ARCH. There are different stages. So what are those? How would you describe those to somebody who has no idea anything about addiction treatment?
Sure.
How that might work.
So when they come in, the first stage is called Buddy. In that stage, you have some goals that you have to complete to go to the next stage. Those are, learning your counselor's name or learning staff member's name, and maybe one reading from some 12-step literature or something like that, and processing that and explaining what that means for you, and safety codes and where the bathroom is, where the kitchen is, where all those logistical things are. So that's a pretty easy one. We anticipate that's 3, 4, 5, maybe a week to meeting what you need to do to go to the next stage. The next stage would be NCM, which is new community member. That's where you're going to get your step 1. You're going to present that to a group of your peers. There's going to be some more 12-step reading. You're going to create your own goal sheet, physical, mental, educational, spiritual goals that you create, that you want to work on, which I think is genius. And then, they'll ask us, do you have an idea for this spiritual goal, or what does this mean, or, whatever. So we're more than willing to help develop that. And as you go up through, new community member, responsible community member, advanced community member, designated campus leader, senior campus leader. And as you go up through those, you're going to be working the following steps. So step 1, step 2, and working up through step 7.
And does that correlate to moving through the cabins and kind of the phases? Because there's the phase 1, phase 2, and then there's a phase 3 as well for some residents.
So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are really more about insurance coverage.
Gotcha.
There is a cabin 1 and the cabin 2. Both hold 12 residents. There is a cabin 3, which I think the idea originally was that it would be like a phase 3, almost kind of like a sober living-ish. It's got its own kitchen. There's only 2 beds in each room. You got your own bathroom, so it's a little bit more independence, a little bit more transitional.
Yeah.
However, COVID happened and turned that into
COVID quarters.
Yeah, COVID quarters for a while. So we were still able to take patients in. But it still is a cabin that once you have kids that are really invested in this thing, really working hard, really committed to making change, that they can go up to cabin 3, and there's different. Obviously, the supervision is still the same because it's still a minor, but there's a little bit more freedom. You can travel between both cabins, share your story in both cabins, be more service related.
Yeah. Where do you hope a kid is actually? How do you know when a kid or a resident is ready to leave Arch?
That's a really challenging question. I think there's this idea when I was in treatment too, and when I worked on our main campus here, that it's almost like when you're afraid to leave, you might be ready to leave. And I'm not saying that's the question we ask. You know, the goal is that everyone would go all the way up to senior campus leader and graduate our program and get a ceremony and the whole shebang. That's the goal.
Which is a cool experience. I've gone to a ceremony.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's really incredible. So that's a challenging question, you know, because once again, we're dealing with adolescent kids. So are we going to see elevated behaviors, especially when we're working step 4, especially when we're working on character defects? We know as people in recovery how when I start to work on character defects, they tend to pop up and it's like whack-a-mole. So behavior is definitely a consideration. However, being bought in, being authentic, showing up, you know, being a leader in your cabin, doing the right thing when no one's looking, all the things that I think you look for in a traditional adult program.
Yeah. One of the things I love about Arch, kind of just like I wanted to share this story because I was here, you know, of course, when Arch was on this campus. And I think Arch, correct me if I'm wrong, it was April 1st, 2020. First day, official
April Fool's Day, yeah.
So I remember, you know, some of the evenings before with QM and also the technology team, like getting the campus ready, you know, like, and at the time, you know, Russ Taylor, who was a big part of the project, and Jay and Dean and William, and I mean, it was a big lift. But one of the things I saw, Arch transformed in a way that I didn't expect. Now, I'm not the program leader, Dean was, and I think this is a part of his vision, but you know, our adult program generally is pretty tied to a 30-day experience.
Sure.
And so naturally, the adolescent experience mirrored some of that in terms of the offerings that we have at that time. But once it moved out into Kingston Springs / Pegram,
Sure.
however you want to identify.
No one really knows.
This is pretty close to the line. But once it moved out to that 70-acre space, you know, it changed. Like you said, you know, average daily or average length of stay is about 100 days, you know, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, a resident can stay there 6 months, up to 6 months. And so we're talking about like a lengthy residential engagement. And I think that offers kids at that developmental stage, and probably, you know, for adults too, in our Stillwaters and extended care programs, the opportunity to experience change that I believe happens over time and not, you know, changes in an event. It doesn't happen overnight. Happens over time. And it's been a beautiful thing to watch that program mature. And I think Dean would say it's been unexpected in some ways for the staff.
Yeah.
You know, like the ceremonies. I want to talk next about the adventure programming and how that's evolved. The phases, the leadership, the totem pole, all the analogies that you guys use for these really kids that are asked to be adults in these environments, to grow up really fast and to take advantage of the experience. And I'm awfully proud and excited for the girls program to spring root.
Yeah, it's exciting.
You know?
I'm excited.
So talk to me about the adventure stuff, because that's a big part of your job these days, and it's kind of organically developed. So first start with all the things that happen at Arch that fall into that category of adventure.
All the things?
Well, you know, you can just list them.
So we have some high ropes activities on that campus. We also have access to this campus that have those. So your leap of faith, your wild woozy, which is the low ropes, your spider's web. But on our campus, primarily, we have crate stack. We have team wall. We have, what's the other one I'm thinking of? There's so many things out there.
The Gaga
Islands.
ball.
Yeah, we had the Gaga ball pit. When I first came on,
basketball, canoeing,
basketball,
equine, which isn't
pickleball, equine, fly fishing, fly tying, camping,
pottery.
And
I'm not saying like pottery, like we just like put it on tables. Like there's like a kiln.
Oh yeah, there's a kiln. There's wheels. It's the
wheels.
whole.
Yeah, I love the wheels.
Yeah,
which I haven't been able. I would like to do one of those groups. You
should come out there. You should come out there.
Like, you know, back in the day where you push the wheel and you do the water and the thing.
Yep.
I guess that's a wheel we all know.
Yeah.
Some of us might not know.
Well,
but that's cool.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And when I first came on talking about the canoe thing, that was one of the first things aside from the fly fishing, that was one thing that I really leaned into was, you know, as opposed to going to one of these places like you used to work, right?
Shout out to the canoe.
Yeah. And paying, you know, this
canoes used to cost
$43.75 a person.
I'm pretty sure. Yep.
10, 15 people.
Yeah.
Staff, you know, that's a pretty penny for a one-day
event. And Arch is right off the Harpeth River for those that don't know. Right.
So I went down to one of the places and said, hey, what does it look like for us to buy, 6, 7, 8 canoes? And we worked out a really good deal, and we have a armada as you will, with 8 canoes, some kayaks. So we're able to do, as long as the water level's safe and the weather's safe and all that, but we're able to do that pretty much whenever we want to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So talk about the fly fishing thing, which correct me if I'm wrong, has been really led in a lot of ways by your passions for fishing. 'Cause it's a really cool recovery on the fly. Link in the description below.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, when I was on this campus, we have a pond on this campus.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, why don't we?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, why don't we just get some? There was some fishing equipment, but it was very minimal and very it'd been used quite a bit. So I sorted through some of that, and I talked to Travis Huck. Shout out Travis, in the young men's program. I said, what does it look like for us to buy, maybe 10, 15 just regular spinning rods? And that's not really where it started, but that was like, I want to try this and see what happens and see if this is something that can be maintained and what it would do for the guys. When I went over to Arch, that was one of the first things I mentioned, the fly fishing thing specifically. I can talk all day about fly fishing if you want to. I love fly fishing. I learned when my dad taught me when I was, I think, about 5 or 6, judging from the picture that I saw. That kind of took off, so I'm not 100% clear on when that actually happened, but I found a picture a few years ago, and it seemed like I was a little tyke. So I have a long history of what fly fishing is and what it feels like. I'm getting a little woo-woo. I'm going to get really woo-woo.
No, please
I
do.
might get emotional.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. But when my dad took me to places like Glacier National Park and the Smokies and the Harpeth and the Caney Fork and all the areas around here and even further, and there was something about it that was just spiritual. And when he left, I was angry, like some of our kids are, and I didn't understand. And I got into, drugs and alcohol. And that's part of my story, obviously. And then when I got clean, I remember, this is where I'm going to get emotional. We went to North Carolina, and it was me and my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, my wife, my daughter, my new stepdad, who's incredible, and my mom. And he had bought me a fly rod. And this was the same trip where I actually proposed to my wife. I proposed to my wife twice before. I'll let you guess where. One from the phone in jail, right?
Yeah, hey, it's a good experience to have.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not.
It was clear to me there, and that she meant a lot to me.
Absolutely.
And that I'd been messing up.
But she was like, "Hey, let's
not do that.
Rain check."
Right. Check. And then one time from inpatient treatment.
That's where I was going.
Okay, yeah.
Which there's a lot of emotions too. So
Big
it was
time.
real for you. Yeah,
Big time.
I got you.
Big time. And then this time was 2 years clean. It was almost to the date. I think that was kind of a trip to celebrate my recovery birthday. Mm-hmm. So I proposed to her, and we went down to this little spot on the river. And I remember stepping in. I hadn't fly fished in quite some time, and I was like, I'm not going to know what to do. This is going to look ridiculous. And it just came back to me. And it was just such a feeling of reconnecting with water, the river, the environment, the fish, families there. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring that to Arch.
Thank you for sharing all that. She said yes.
She said yes.
How long have y'all been married?
It was 2019. So we have a anniversary coming up, April 14th.
Good.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Shout out to her. What's her name?
Maggie.
Maggie. Shout out to you, Maggie.
Yeah.
Fly fishing's different than your traditional pond bass fishing.
Thank you for saying traditional.
I mean, I think I have a lot of memories of being really hot in like an aluminum body boat.
Yeah.
And being like, what are we doing? And fly fishing, the water is moving generally. I mean, you can fly fish on a lake, but you're in a stream out west. My experience is stream fly fishing in New Mexico and Colorado. Beautiful. And reading the river.
Yeah.
And traveling upstream and having to understand what bugs are in season. I never got like that nerdy about it, but like I knew enough to be dangerous. Are we going to go wet? Are we going to go dry?
Nice.
Where are we at? And then, out west, like reading the granite, like seeing the fish.
Right.
Like once you start to because they're just posted.
Right.
And they're waiting for that little snack, that little Lunchable.
Right. To come
down. And then they pop out.
Yep.
They're not, a lot of people think they're just like cruising down the river.
Right.
They're usually in these crevices.
Yep.
Kind of just waiting for that snack to come along. And there's something, it's one of the things I love about like farming. I grew up farming at my grandparents' house. And, whether that was potatoes or butter beans or watermelons or, even a fig tree, there's something
tangible,
spiritual, tangible about being connected to outside.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool. And I want you to talk about Shade to Me. I haven't gone yet. I've been invited. I told
everybody
times.
I was going to put you on blast.
I know. That's okay. I'll put myself on blast.
That's why we didn't do the podcast yet, because I wanted you to come and experience it. Yeah. We'll get you out there.
But, the whole experience of going camping with the kids, waking up early the next morning, going fishing, kind of talk about sort of like what the experience is like. It's not just on a hot summer day,
right?
Going at 3 p.m. That's not when you really go fly fishing anyways,
right.
But
tell us about that. You can. So the specifically the camping kind of idea. So maybe usually like a Thursday we'll do like a camp out because the kids don't have school on Friday. So, as long as it's not too hot, not too cold. It's
Yeah.
comfortable. I mean, I want it to be a little cold. That's okay. That's camping. So we'll go to our campsite. Like you said, we have 66 acres, almost 70 acres. And in our back pasture, we have a spot where we set up, our tent and our fire pit, and we have chairs around there, and we run the majority of the programming for that night at the campsite. So then we'll do that. They'll go play flashlight tag or whatever the boys want to do, in the field, and they're close enough that we're able to see them, and we're in a safe place where they can kind of spread out a little bit. I just think they don't get a lot of that while we're still on our campus. So, and then the next morning, once I finally get them to go to bed, the next morning we'll wake up early, usually about 4:00, and break camp and go down to the dining hall and eat together and load up all the fly fishing stuff and head out to our fly fishing programming, which is usually from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So it's a good chunk of time too. And we'll have coffee on the river. We have a fire there too. Chairs set up, canopy in case it's raining or something like that. If it's raining, we don't just cancel it, If there's thunder,
it's part of it.
If there's thunder and, real safety concerns, then obviously we would. But I've seen kids fish in the rain. I've seen them fish in the snow. I've seen them fish in the summer. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And you have some really cool community partners that have helped stand this program up, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. The TWRA, which is Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, partnered with us through Kyle Williams, another shout out, who's an employee here, and actually provide the kids with a 1-year fishing license with a trout stamp in the state of Tennessee once they reach a certain stage in our program, which is CM, community member.
It's very cool.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
And there have been other people that have made donations. I think that's a cool opportunity. There might be somebody that is interested in collaborating in some way. We'll be sure to leave your contact information or certainly our social media will be pinned in this episode. So for anybody that's interested, Arch and Cumberland Heights in general, we're always interested in partnering in our community in any way, shape, or form, which leads me to Arch. At Arch.
Okay, I see. Which is still the TWRA. I do want to mention too, like you said, there has been individual people that maybe donated a rod or an old set of waders or whatever. So definitely want to commend them for that, because that's been really nice to have some backup.
And it gets used.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we have is going to be used. And then Trout Unlimited too. They donated the kind of the cost for the launching when we got all of our main equipment that we have today. Yeah. And then people tack on, little things. I had a lady last week. She's actually Laura's stepmom, donated a bunch of backpacks and camping gear.
Really? Yeah. That's so cool.
A lot of stuff that we can even use on the fishing trip.
Shout out to Laura's stepmom.
Incredible. April Ezel.
Yeah. That's really kind.
She used to teach, I think, backpacking component at Lipscomb. So
really?
Yeah. And pickleball. What? So she's supposed to come out and teach the kids some pickleball stuff because they love pickleball.
Cool. Very cool.
But archery, archery is was actually a new one.
It's the next frontier.
It's the next frontier. I had that thought kind of a long time ago, but I was like, man, I don't know what that's going to look like. That seems like a lot of policies, a lot of paperwork. I mean, how does that even? And the TWRA came out to kind of reassess their contribution. Not that they were questioning it or anything like that, but just look, what does it look like? Is there a way? Because my question was, is there a way for us to get like a facility fishing license so we don't have to send all this paperwork in? But they still handle it that way. So each kid does get a 1-year license in Tennessee. But they had a new Region 3 coordinator, Matt Clary, and he was like, yeah, the fishing license is really cool, but I want to actually talk to you about archery. And I was like, oh, well, I had that thought a long time ago. What does that look like? And he told me about a program called NASP, which is National Archery in the Schools program, and had me and one of the guys on my team, who's also our case manager, get basic archery instructor certified through they paid for that too. So they're going to cover, a bunch of bows and arrows and targets.
A bulk of all the materials, right?
A solid 80 5%
Yeah.
of the launch. So,
and it's real safe. But what I was misunderstanding when like you first started talking about archery is I was like, oh, we're just going to like get out there,
Right.
you know, with some traditional, not compound,
Right.
you know, but it's not like that at all.
no.
You know, it's very much paced,
Yes.
one at a time.
One at a time.
Lots of rules. There are standards. Very safe. So I'm excited and just proud of you, man, and proud of Arch and everybody else at Arch. Like that's worked so hard to create a beautiful program. You know, when you think about the camping and when you think about recovery on the fly, the zip line, just kind of hidden.
I forgot to mention that one. That was the one I forgot.
What I want to know is what you think the kids get out of this kind of stuff. Why is it important that we do it?
It's a great question. It's a question that's asked a lot. Obviously, you know, the mental health benefits to being in green spaces, we all know is a huge component. I think another component is a lot of those adventure elements are going to teach, you know, that you can't do this element on your own. It's impossible to complete this by yourself. So kind of a community building, team building kind of thing. I think there's also, I was looking at a presentation that Dean sent me, and they were talking about how, and this is boys, girls are just a little bit different. It talks about how boys show love. And it's this old timer talking about how when he was little, they would go down, him and his friends, you know, 10, 12, 15, whatever, and they would go in the basement and they would literally throw darts at each other in the dark. And I'm like, that is wild, but I can relate. You know, maybe bottle rocket wars or whatever, you know, boys kind of show love that way. So when we go to do these things, and once again, Dean, you know, paid for me to get my wilderness first responder thing too. So we're keeping everything safe. But once again, we're able to kind of let loose a little bit and, you know, don't want anyone to get hurt, but also want to have, you know, a good time and do things that are challenging and show love in that way, but without throwing darts at each other in the dark.
Yeah, and be in a safe environment and be clean and sober.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, which
Sober fun. It's possible.
versus, you know, not that every kid, but, you know, vaping THC in a park somewhere with your friends.
Right.
After school.
Right.
You know, like that's not happening at Arch.
Yeah.
You know, also Arch, we should probably mention this, has an accredited high school.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the state of Tennessee, you know, and so I think maybe 11 graduations since we've been out at that. I could be wrong about that number. I think
It seems like it might be a little bit more, but
okay.
close. I don't know. Fact check. No?
We could fact check later, but I think that's an important piece that, you know,
Absolutely.
It's so cool that they get to continue with their education. A lot of them or several of them actually get to graduate from our school. So none of that gets put on pause, you know, which is always, I think, a concern. It would be for me.
Sure.
You know, if my son was at Arch Academy and he's that age, you know, 16, 17 years old, you know, I certainly want balance. You know, him being healthy is the most important thing, but want him to be able to take advantage of the time that he has and not waste it.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm glad you said that because there are kind of the three pillars that Dean was talking about, like a triangle, like AA, right?
yeah.
And it's, you know, just like you said, academics, recovery, and then adventure. So all three of those things are obviously being covered in huge parts of a patient's experience.
Do you think you're going to be helping with the girls program at all with this adventure stuff?
I think so.
Remains to be seen, maybe?
Yeah. When I talked to Matt Clary, the TWRA, he was talking about, we'd been on the phone. You saw the presentation. I did all the research and all the conversations I had about, you know, safety and what that looks like. And he was talking about the NAS program. Well, we operate a little bit differently than they do. You know, we are one at a time, like you said. They're a little bit more kind of let the kids, you know, shoot 3 or 4 arrows at a time, but we're one at a time. But he was telling me that the current state champion was a 6th grade girl.
That's right.
For the archery program. So I think, you know, archery would be a pretty natural shift over to, and fly fishing too, I think too. I mean, it would be a pretty natural shift over to the girls program and put in some adventure elements and all that kind of stuff and just build that up.
Yeah. Girls want to have those experiences just like
Absolutely.
boys do.
Absolutely.
You know? And given the proximity of that facility, their location to the same resources,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
right around the corner will be super, super invaluable.
Yeah. It's less than 2 miles, I think.
Yeah. So how long have you been with Cumberland Heights?
I have been at Cumberland Heights since August 2017. I got hired on to the men's program as an RA by Travis Hupp. He told me I better say that.
I believe it.
And
Travis.
I think I took a PRN position at first, but I pretty quickly shifted into a full-time position and then kind of worked my way up to a CA team lead in the men's program, and then up to case manager in young men's program, and then float counselor in young men's program. Actually trained in the women's program for a little while as a case manager.
And you have your LADAC.
I do.
Yep.
And
CPRS, I believe.
actually, I don't have that anymore.
Oh,
No.
got it.
Yeah, LADAC that's where I want to be. You know,
Yeah.
CPRS is kind of like pre-LADAC. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, then worked up as a float counselor in the young men's program. So I'm kind of going where they need, you know, if somebody's on vacation or something like that. And that schedule was challenging with the family. And I was talking to Travis actually when that position came open at Arch. And my first thought was, I don't know, you know, what is that? I can't imagine, you know, what that would be like. And Travis really helped kind of push me in that direction and, you know, said, why don't you, you know, go talk to Dean and see what you think. And William and Dean invited me out for an interview and to see the campus and a tour and the whole thing, and just fell in love. I mean, the campus is obviously beautiful. And then the first time I sat down with patients before I even had a caseload is when I had that moment, like, this is kind of the same thing. You know, they have insight and they have words for their feelings, and this is where I want to be. So
Why Arch?
So like I said, when I first interviewed and I talked about the fly fishing thing, that was a huge part. Just not to say that it wouldn't be obviously valued or anything like that on main campus, but it was more of a natural fit, if that makes any sense. You know, you have longer lengths of stay. You have you know, the ability to, you know, spend 3 or 4 hours on the river, you know, when they don't have school or whatever. So that was kind of a natural fit. And then thinking about that idea that this is the same thing, what does it mean if we get on the front end of this deal? You know, what if we can help somebody develop skills to not only remain clean or sober, but to, you know, manage their mental health and to cope and to learn vocabulary, to have conversations with their family about how they're feeling or their peers, or, you know, that's huge. You know?
Yeah, that's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
An active change and regaining what's been lost.
Yeah.
And that's part of the piece that I really was hoping that you harped on, which you did perfectly, brother, which is just, you know, the struggle that I identified at the beginning of the episode doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's about helping these kids, like you identified, learn new tools and skills and spiritual principles that they can apply in their life to try to skip any of the dereliction.
Yeah.
That's just unnecessary,
It's
that you and
unnecessary.
I can share plenty about with them.
Yeah.
And many others, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll just say from the outside looking in, you're perfect fit out there. You know, I mean, from Dean and what he shares with me and the rest of the group that I tend to be around, you know, an awful bit, and the impact that you've had in some of the personal friends that have had kids that have come through there. I mean, like, all I hear about is how much you're a beloved staple of that community and how those kids really gravitate to you for some probably pretty obvious reasons, right? It's because you're out there to pour into them based on your own experience
Right.
and trying to give them an opportunity to spread their wings, whether that's flashlight tag or super cold and maybe resentful, drinking, river coffee, I think, as you call it,
Yeah.
down at the harvest at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Like it's funny how God sometimes picks us up by the collar and leads us in a direction that we least expect.
Yeah.
And for you, and I think about you, and I think about jail, and I think about treatment in North Carolina and CPRS and LADAC and case management and PRN CA, like that's a great way to come up.
Yeah.
It's
incredible.
You learn a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really, really incredible. And
But where
do
you are
learn a lot.
today I'm proud of you, brother.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That means a lot.
I'm excited for where you're going to build that program and what's going to happen next, man. Those kids are lucky to have you.
Well, thank you.
So,
I'm lucky to have them.
yeah.
They help me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're going to get me out on the river sooner than later. Will you guys come too?
Yeah.
Even if it's at what time do we have to be there?
We meet in the dining hall at 5:30.
In the morning.
Yes. She said in the morning.
I met you at the river.
He's been there.
Shout out to Ryan.
Yeah, he got footage out there.
So Ryan, we'll give Ryan credit. He's
off the hook.
He's been there.
You were not.
I'm not. I have not made it there yet. Yeah. But it's right down the road, so
It's not
no
so bad.
excuses.
I think if I'm thinking of a question that you might want to ask me, how about that?
Yeah, sure.
What if I have a question I want to ask you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I don't have one yet, but I might.
I was like, I know. Let's dive in.
The question I get the most from the kids regarding
Who is that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. When they see you, who is that? Why? They ask me why fly fishing? Why not? That's why I said I appreciate you saying traditional, because a lot of them, why not just normal fishing or whatever? And there's so many answers to that question. I mean, if I were to put fishing in two different categories, because there's freshwater, saltwater, all different kinds of reels, equipment, body, pop. There's passive fishing, which is kind of what you were talking about, where you're sitting in the boat, it's hot, you're looking at a bobber, which is fun. No problem with that. Mm-hmm. And then there's active fishing. I would put fly fishing in that more active, and you kind of described it too. It's more of a pursuit. It's more of a, you're not just sitting watching. You're forced to become connected with that environment and with the people around you, because you're slinging around a 9-foot fly rod with 30, 40 feet
On the
of
side
line.
of Pigeon River, and you're kind of like, how am I gonna, and you're trying to hit
a small target.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of it, I think, too. I know for me, it's definitely more active. It's not just, and there's nothing wrong. It's definitely meditative to do that kind of thing as well. But to really become a part of that, and you got both arms and hands moving, and looking for sighting for fish, and all the things that go with that, like you said, which way is the water flowing, and all of those things are critical.
Look, when I think about adventure, this is part of the problem. When I think, this is something that I think we could do well at remembering. In my experience, change is not insight driven. It's action oriented.
Right.
That's what I love about systems theory, which is what I'm trained in as a clinician. It's what I love about recovery. Like, recovery doesn't care what we think about it.
Right.
0%.
Right.
That might be controversial to some, but in my experience, it doesn't matter if I think I'm an addict or not. Am I going to keep showing up? It doesn't matter if I'm convinced of a resentment or not in the flat book in step 1. Am I going to keep writing? Because in my experience, my higher power, God, is in the whites of other people's eyes. It helps me spot self-deception. And when you talk about fly fishing, that's what I think about. It's not about what we think about it. It's about the experience.
Yeah.
It's not something that we just put on a marketing pamphlet because we think that it's something that will, people want to participate in. It's because we think that there's meaning there of a kid waking up and being like, why did we decide to do this?
Yeah, I don't want to do this.
It is way too early, and I stayed up way too late.
Yep.
And showing up and experiencing the sounds and the feeling, and those are elemental keystone experiences that, to be frank, a lot of kids don't get.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, how many kids are fly fishing in Middle Tennessee? Not a lot.
No. And that was another thing too. I did a bunch of research for a presentation that we did on the fly fishing program, and it's like 2% of people in the world have fly fished.
Really?
Yeah.
That seems high.
Well, I think that's if you take the entire world, but you're delivering an experience that you know is going to be new. I mean, I've had one kid that had any experience with fly fishing,
right?
So you're putting them in a situation where there's going to be some natural humility that's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have to learn a process. You're going to have to practice. It's going to be frustrating.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have to problem solve on your own. I'm here to help, but this is what it is, and this is how you solve that problem.
Yeah.
And if you can take that and apply it to, you know, emotional states or work or school or whatever, it's kind of the same problem solving component.
Last question.
Okay.
Before you drive home.
Okay.
Because Maggie wants you there.
She does. Thank God.
Who should we have on here next? Because I know you've listened to every episode.
Man, that's a good question.
You did like the Nikki episode.
Mm-hmm.
So shout out Nikki Soda.
Yes.
We love her. But who would you suggest?
Man. Is it an employee or
No.
Okay.
Give us one suggestion. Theo Vaughn? Please collab.
This is a hard ask. What about Dax Shepard?
We can shoot for him. Why not? We'll send him a
He's like the original podcast.
direct message. Is he?
They're with Armchair.
Mm-hmm.
Armchair expert?
Mm-hmm.
He's in recovery.
He's in recovery.
Yep.
So that's a stretch, I know, but
Hey,
I think you could do it.
well, we're all about dreaming here.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're gonna try to get a nurse. You know, look, part of why we did this
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
was there's a lot of jargon about treatment.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, I guess it was to maybe push through the polish of a website or a brochure and just have real conversations with real people that have experienced recovery or work in treatment or are a community partner like Nikki.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to me to have that person that's in the call center or working in the adventure program or the nurse that's worked here for 20 years or the CEO even. Wow, yeah. You know, just to have non-scripted, as quiet as it's kept, my team's going to kill me. But we have a lot of folks that keep telling me this needs to be scripted. It's not going to be scripted.
Yeah.
You know, I can't be scripted. And
I like the natural flow.
If you're gonna, you know, somebody's gonna watch it. I just would imagine as a parent or someone who might be sending someone somewhere, you know, if they're using this as a metric of quality to get to know us and to get to know our culture, I want to know what you really think,
Right.
Not what's scripted,
Right.
You know, and that's what, you know, this podcast show. I know everybody has a podcast, but like that's really the genesis, is just to give people an insight into who we are. We.
Yeah.
Because we're all just temporary proprietors in what we do today. But what we do so that somebody can make an informed decision. Because there's folks and kids that are coming through our arches every day, and it's a hard decision, you know. And so we're going to keep on grinding.
I love it.
But I love you, man, and I've really appreciated to get to know you, and I'm excited to where you'll go next. So we'll have to have you out again. Next time you're here, you should bring a rod and a reel and give us like a demo with the limited space we have.
I can do it. I have some.
Or flies.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Oh, I have a question for you.
Yeah, what's it?
Finally got it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yep.
What is the difference between an alligator and a crocodile?
Difference between an alligator and a crocodile. I don't know what. I can ask for help.
Okay.
You tell me.
I'll tell you. One you see later and one you see after a while.
Did you know that? Is that what you knew?
She's going to be more scientific. I know you're science.
Thanks,
guy,
everybody.
so-
We're going to ping. We're going to, in the description below, you'll have more information about arch.org and our beautiful adolescent programs, a little bit more about Kenny and his experience and some of our socials. And just thanks again for the support. See you later.